At age 52, Roberto was rushed to the hospital with a heart attack. In the operating room, he had a near-death experience. God, he said, is this the end of my time on earth? No, God said, you've got another 41 years, 3 months, and 8 days left. Recovering in the hospital, it occurred to Roberto that if I've got that much time left, maybe I should spruce myself up a little bit. And so over the next few weeks in the hospital, he had a tummy tuck, a hair transplant, and a facelift. So that by the time he was ready to leave, he was looking good. But in a cruel twist of fate, not more than 50 feet outside the hospital door, he was struck and killed by an ambulance. Back up in heaven, Roberto says, God, I thought you said I had another 41 years, 3 months, and 8 days. God said, Roberto, is that you? I didn't recognize you. As God Almighty looks down at you from heaven today, does God recognize you as the person you were created to be? Does your life look anything like what God intended? Are you accomplishing the purposes for which God put you here on the face of the earth? Today, we come to the last guidepost in our sermon series based on Brené Brown's best-selling book, The Gifts of Imperfection. By now, you know that each guidepost represents a different primary characteristic of people who are engaged in wholehearted living. Guidepost number 9 reminds us that wholehearted people who are thriving in life, cultivate meaningful, do we have the slides going here? There we go. Cultivate meaningful work by letting go of self-doubt and supposed to. Those who are at or near retirement age may hear this and think, this is a sermon I can sleep through because my basic life work is already accomplished. I hate to break it to you, but God's not done with you yet. Many people have discovered that their most meaningful work in life occurred after they thought they were already done. So today's sermon is not just for the young'uns among us, it's for each one of us, wherever we find ourselves on life's journey today. And by the way, speaking of young'uns, Melina, I'm excited to see what you're doing there and how it's coming along, and we'll be watching as we go along. Beware of the bad jokes, all right? They might throw you off a little bit. If you see a hiccup in her drawing, you know I am responsible for interrupting. Let's start with a prayer. God, who among us doesn't want to live a meaningful life? Who among us doesn't want to make a significant difference? Remind us of some spiritual principles today that will ensure that we do just that. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Jeremiah 1:5. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. Those words were first spoken by God to the prophet Jeremiah, but because they've been recorded in the Holy Scriptures, these words are meant for each one of us. Consecrated means dedicated to a sacred purpose. So this morning, I want you to hear God saying to you, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I dedicated you to certain sacred purposes. And because God created you, formed you for certain sacred purposes, God also custom designed you to fit those purposes. Psalm 139, verse 13, it was you, O God, who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. You are a fearsome, awesome miracle of the living God, uniquely crafted for certain sacred purposes. So many people in this world get so confused about what is God's will for my life. Here's a really big hint. If God knew you before you were formed, and if God formed you for certain sacred purposes, then the best way to fulfill God's will is to be yourself. This is Brené Brown's first of 3 key principles for living into the meaningful work for which God has created us. If you want to do meaningful work in your life, pay attention to your creation blueprint and follow it as best you can as circumstances permit. Be who you were created to be. When I was a kid, even as a kid, at a young age already, I found myself being really fascinated by sermons. Not just by the content of sermons, but by the craft of sermonizing. In the churches that I was raised in, fundamentalist Baptist churches, twice each year we would have a revival week during which we would bring in a different traveling evangelist, someone who was gifted in delivering impactful messages. And during that week, each night of the week, we would gather and listen to a sermon from that evangelist. I would always purchase their sermon tapes, take it home, put it in my tape recorder. Many a nights I would fall asleep at night listening to sermons as I drifted off to sleep, while other kids were listening to the Rolling Stones and the Grateful Dead. There I was, listening to my sermons on tape. Yes, I was a strange child. I remember in particular one sermon given by an evangelist. I don't remember the evangelist's name, but in it he told a story of a man who almost made a decision to follow Jesus but hesitated. Then the next day was killed in an automobile accident. Dead, I tell you. That's exactly how the evangelist put it. I would play that part over and over again. Dead, I tell you, because I was fascinated with how he was using words and rhythm to try to bring home to our heart the impact of the story. Even at a young age, something inside me was responding to that with passion. Now, if you'd asked me at the time, what do you want to be when you grow up, Jeff? I would have said a professional basketball player. But God apparently had a different plan. And even at a young age, that creation blueprint was starting to show forth. How about you? What is it that you are naturally passionate about? What is it that you are naturally good at that draws you like a moth to a flame? Pay attention to that. It's a huge hint as to God's will, God's purpose for your life. As many of you know by now, at home, David and I have a new cat named Pee-Pee, short for Peter Pan. Pee-Pee is a little over a year old now, but is still the tiniest little thing. She was rescued from a dumpster, so probably malnutrition has probably permanently stunted the size that she's going to get to. But she's a tiny little thing, but she is thriving now. And she is full of energy. I mean, she is a perpetual motion machine. And her most favorite thing in the world to do is to play with her red laser light dot. David is the one who always operates the laser. So whenever David is sitting in the family room, Pee-Pee will make her way inevitably into the family room. She will sit there and she will stare at the corner of the family room where her dot normally appears. She sits there and stares as if it's a little prayer. Please let my friend the red dot come out and play. And when it does, she goes nuts. Let me show you a little home video, which, by the way, is not very well shot, but take a look at this. Can you see that? There's the dot. There's her Spider-Man imitation. She will repeatedly throughout the day keep coming into the family room. It gets kind of dark here, sorry. I wasn't the one who shot this home video, so don't blame me. But it'll come back again. It'll come back in a second. She constantly is coming in the family, constantly begging that she can play with her little red dot. And then she'll start running sideways, horizontal on the vertical plane of the couch. And then she'll jump down and it gets into her box. There we go. Her favorite box. Now she's got it trapped. Look at her back end, start to wiggle with excitement, and then she pounces. She will play this game constantly. She loves it. She is never quite so alive as when she's playing with her red dot. Clearly, God created her for the purpose of amusing David, and she does it well. What is it that really causes you to come alive? Pay attention to that. It's a really big clue as to what God put you here on earth to do. Here are 4 questions each of us should ask ourselves. Question number 1, what am I really good at? Question number 2, what am I not so good at? Question number 3, what am I really passionate about? And question number 4, what am I dispassionate about? Let the answers to that question guide you into the center of God's will in your life. Theologian Howard Thurman puts it this way: don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, and go do it, because what the world needs most is people who have fully come alive. Brené Brown says most of us who are searching for spiritual connection spend way too much time looking up at the sky and wondering why God lives so far away. God lives within us, not above us. Sharing our gifts and talents with the world is the most powerful source of connection with God. You will never be quite so alive. You will never be quite so connected to God as when you are following your passion, your calling, your creation blueprint. This then is the first key principle that Brené Brown lays down for us. Pay attention to your creation blueprint. Follow it as best you can, which then leads to principle number 2. Never get trapped in the expectations of others. In the final analysis, only you and God are in a position to ultimately decide what you were created to be and what you were created to do. There will be a whole lot of people around you who think they know why God put you here and what you're supposed to do. And yes, it's always good to listen to the advice of others, but in the final analysis, only you and God can make that decision. Just ask Jesus. With all of the extraordinary events surrounding Jesus' birth, you would think that his family, especially his mother, would have been really clued in to who Jesus was supposed to be and what he was supposed to do. But Mark chapter 3 tells us a stunning story about how there came a point in the ministry of Jesus where he was getting a lot of bad press, where people were saying terrible things about Jesus. They were saying things like Mark 3:21, he's gone out of his mind. They were saying things like verse 23, he has Beelzebul, and by the ruler of the demons, Beelzebul, he casts out demons. So people were going around and saying, Jesus is crazy and Jesus is demon-possessed. Now, watch this twist in the story. When his family heard this, they went out to, keyword, restrain him. Jesus, you're taking this a little too far. Why don't you come home and rest? Everything will be okay. So they found where Jesus was ministering in a house full of people, so full of people they couldn't get in. But they sent a message into Jesus. His family sent a message into him saying, your mother and your brothers and your sisters are outside asking for you. And guess how Jesus responded? He rebuffed them. He didn't even, as best we can tell from how the story is told, he didn't even go outside to talk to them, and he sure wasn't going to go home with them, because he knew who he was created to be, and what he was supposed to be doing. And even if those he loved most, his mother, his sisters, and his brothers, didn't understand and were pressuring him to be or do something else, Jesus stood his ground. Thank God Jesus didn't let others restrain him and dictate his God-given purpose, and neither should we. God has put each one of us here for critically important creation purposes, and we've got to stick to that creation blueprint. There will be people, not just people in our families, but culture itself has all of these definitions about what success is supposed to look like, what we are supposed to be doing. Peggy Campello, who is the wife of a famous author and preacher, Tony Campello. Peggy Campello, for a period of her life, felt called to be a stay-at-home mom, focusing on raising their 2 children. During that period of life, she says, often on social occasions, she says, often people would walk up to me and say, kind of in a condescending tone, "And what do you do, dear?" Peggy says, I decided to memorize an answer so that from then on, when people would walk up to her and say, "What do you do, dear?" she says, I would respond by saying, I am socializing 2 Homo sapiens into the high values of the Judeo-Christian tradition in order that they might be instruments for the transformation of the social order into the kind of eschatological utopia that God willed from the beginning of creation. Then she would say, "And what do you do?" There are all kinds of reasons and purposes for which God has placed us here on the face of the earth. What you are called to do may not be what I am called to do, and it may not be what you're called to do, but each of us has been put here for significant purposes, and often the most significant work in life may be the things that we think are least important, because God's definition of success and importance and meaning is not always what our definition is. Here's a little quiz for you. See how you do on this quiz, all right? Question number 1. Name the 5 wealthiest people in the world. Tyler, who? Tyler Perry. Question number 2. Name the last 5 Academy Award-winning actors and actresses. Question number 3. Name 5 people who've recently won a Pulitzer or Nobel Prize. That's 1. Got 4 more? Question number 4. Name the last 5 Heisman Trophy winners. Unless you're going on Jeopardy, most of us are going to get a D- on a test like that. I mean, these are the most famous, the most impactful people in the world, right? They haven't impacted us much. But here's another quiz. See how you do on this one. Name 3 teachers who had a formative impact on your life. We can all do that, right? Name some friends who stuck by you during a difficult period in your life. That's easy. Name somebody who made you feel special and appreciated. Name 5 people whose examples have inspired your life. We can all get an A+ on that quiz, right? Because those people made such a profound difference in our lives. Some of us are created to live out loud, and some of us are created to live quiet. Some of us are on a path that God has called us that will lead to fame, but most of us are on a path of toiling in obscurity. But God gives each one of us significant work to do. There are people who need to be touched in this world that only you can touch, and if you don't do that, it won't happen. There are things that need to happen here on planet Earth that only you can do, and if you don't do it, it won't happen. God does not measure significance as we measure significance. Each one of us has been put here to do something infinitely important in the eyes of God. Bishop Claude Alexander says, there is a purpose for you being here. You are meant to answer something, to solve something, provide something, lead something, discover something, compose something, write something, say something, translate something, interpret something, sing something, create something. Teach something, preach something, bear something, overcome something, and in so doing, you will improve the lives of others under the power of God for the glory of God. Follow your sense of call. Follow your passion, no matter what others may say. Which finally then brings us to Brené Brown's third point. Third principle, which can be stated in the form of a question. How safe should I play it? How much risk should I be willing to take in the pursuit of my sense of God's blueprint for my life? Our gospel passage that you heard Deb read earlier tees up that question perfectly. In Matthew 4, Jesus had launched his ministry, was traveling around and beginning to recruit his core disciples. Matthew chapter 4, verse 18 says, as Jesus walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting their nets into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, follow me, and I will make you fish for people. Immediately, they left their nets and followed him. Imagine what that moment must have been like when Jesus looks at Peter and Andrew and says, follow me. Imagine what they must have been feeling in that motion. I'm sure they had heard him preach on a number of occasions, and I'm sure the words of Jesus had powerfully drawn them. But now Jesus was offering them the opportunity to play an integral role in a movement that had the potential to change everything. I'm sure they were at once both very excited and very queasy in their stomachs. I'm sure there was a part of them that said, yes, I can sense, for this I was created. This is what I'm supposed to do. But I'm also sure that there were voices that were raising all of the self-doubts and all of the supposed tos. Voices that were saying to them, but you've got a business to run. You can't just drop and go out and follow Jesus around. And you've got a family that you're supposed to support. And you're just an uneducated fisherman. You're not the kind of person who's supposed to pursue a higher education with a rabbi and become a disciple. And you're not good with words and teaching people. And who's going to listen to you? I'm sure there were all these voices in their heads, and then there was this moment, and Jesus is saying, follow me, and I see Peter looking at his brother Andrew as their eyes meet. It's as if they're saying to each other, what are we going to do? And I imagine Peter saying, let's do this, Andrew. We're only going to live once. Let's do this. And they throw caution to the wind, and they follow. Imagine yourself in that situation. What would you do? That story to me is really exciting and really scary. What if God calls me to do something crazy? An old man was sitting at a bus stop waiting when a young man walks up with blue, green, orange, spiky hair. The old man stares at the young man until the young man finally says, what's the matter, old man? Have you ever done anything wild in your life? Oh, yes, the old man says. I once had a fling with a parrot, and I was wondering if you might be my long-lost son. What if God calls you, me, to do something wild? I'm a by-the-books kind of guy. I want a strategy that maps it out step by step. But then along comes this Jesus, looks me in the eye and says, take a risk. Take a leap of faith. And I say, that wouldn't be prudent, Jesus. And Jesus says, come on. If you fall, God will catch you. I love the quote from the movie We Bought a Zoo, where Benjamin Mee says, sometimes all you need in life is 20 seconds of insane courage. Just literally 20 seconds of embarrassing bravery. And I promise you, something great will come of it. That's what Andrew and Peter did. Just 20 seconds of embarrassing bravery. They said, yes, we'll do it. Be like Andrew. Be like Peter. This is the final principle that Brené Brown lays out for us. Don't play it too safe. Don't be afraid to take a few flying leaps of faith during the course of your life when God is calling, when your passion is tugging at your heartstrings. None of us wants to get to the end of our days and look back and say, what if? What if I'd done that? What if I'd summoned just enough courage? None of us wants to get to that place. Don't let that happen to you. Let me close with two stories. After church last Sunday, Sunshine Rucker came up to me and told me a story. Many of you know Sunshine Deacon. Sunshine, if you don't, here's a picture of Sunshine. Sunshine is a professional chauffeur. And recently he took a course at the Urban League that's meant to equip you to maximize your career and your personal life. And after graduating that course, the Urban League offered Sunshine a job driving for them. They have a new program there, a grant-funded program that helps transport impoverished people from their home to their workplace, because often people are trapped in poverty because they can't afford to pay for the transportation that would get them to a good job. So for 6 months, when they start a new job, Urban League gets them to work and back from work. So Sunshine is an integral part of that program. And his role is that there are 5 workers that are working the night shift at Cummins Engine down in Columbus, Indiana. So Sunshine's job is to go to the Urban League late afternoon, early evening, pick up those 5 workers, drive them all the way down to Columbus, Indiana, drop them off for the third shift, and then the next morning drive all the way back to Columbus, pick them up, and bring them all the way back to Indianapolis. So it was a couple weeks ago when Sunshine showed up at the Urban League one evening for a normal night of work, and when he arrived there, none of the 5 workers were there, not one of them. So he gets on the phone and calls his boss and says, "What's up?" His boss says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot to tell you that we canceled it for tonight." Now, this is one of those moments in life, right, where you want to go bonkers. You know, you've planned your life around your work. You've taken all the time to drive in to work at the Urban League. And now they say, "Oh, never mind." And it never even occurs to them that you might have been counting on that income from that night. But the Sunday before, we had covered that point about cultivating play and rest in our lives. And so Sunshine, in that moment, when he could have gone bonkers, instead said, maybe this is a God thing. Maybe I'm supposed to take tonight to rest and relax, so I'm going to make the most of it. So Sunshine decided, I'm going to stop by someplace, get some carry-out food, and then drive on to this lookout point that he knows. And while I'm eating, I'm going to watch the sunset, and I'm going to snap some photographs, spend some time communing with God and nature. On the way there, he stops at a speedway to gas up. And while he's gassing up his vehicle, a stranger gets out of a vehicle with Illinois license plates, walks up to him while he's pumping the gas in his car, and says, "Here, I want you to have this," and hands him something. Sunshine says, "I was preoccupied with pumping the gas. I figured this person would just give me a religious tract or a flyer promoting something, and I didn't pay much attention to it. I just let the person put whatever it was in my hand while I kept pumping." The guy walks off. When Sunshine is done pumping the gas, he finally looks down at his hand and sees this stranger has stuffed a wad of money in his hand. 3 $10 bills, $30. Sunshine said to me, if Jeff starts talking to me, we're all in trouble. Sunshine said to me, "Jeff, that is exactly the amount of money I would have made working that night." For him, it was a God moment. One of those mystical moments in life that remind us that there is so much more to our reality than meets the eye, and that if we are faithful, if we live in accordance with faith, even when things take an unexpected turn, God will provide. God will catch us when we fall, all of which means that as followers of Jesus, we can afford to take some risks in life. We don't have to play it so safe. Even if you're getting at a part in life where you're old enough you think it's time for me to hunker down and play it safe, don't play it too safe. Your most meaningful work in life may still lie ahead of you. The last story. Recently, a bookstore in England sold a book that had been on its shelf for 27 years. It was kind of an odd book, a children's book that told the story of William the Conqueror. So, not a lot of market for that book. But after 27 years on the shelf, the book finally sold. The proprietor of the bookstore was so excited, she sent out a tweet saying, "I've just sold a book that we have had in stock since May of 1991. We always knew its day would come." That tweet went viral and got a lot of responses, including one from an author named Sarah Todd Taylor. And this is what she wrote. The book held its breath. It had hoped so often, only to have that hope crushed. Then hands lifted it from the shelf, wrapped it warmly in paper. As the door closed on its past life, the book heard the soft cheers of its shelf mates. The moral of the story? Dare to be who you were created to be. Never change your story for somebody else. Trust that if you are faithful to God's creation blueprint for your life, your time will come sooner or later, one way or another, and your life will have great significance. And someday in heaven, as you stand before God, you'll be able to hear God say, "Thank you for being you. Thank you for having the courage to be you." The one and only, the person that God said, "This is what my planet needs next." We need you. Be who you were created to be.